Our guest tonight is a real trooper. Mike Campbell has a couple of websites. Mike Campbell spent 9 years as active duty Navy print and broadcast journalist and 21 years as civilian writer and Air Force public affairs officer, retiring from federal service in 2008. Originally from College Park, Maryland, he is a 1974 graduate of the University of Maryland. I'm going to let Mike talk a little bit about his bio because tonight we're going to be talking about Amelia Earhart. All these different, we talk about all the things that are so hard to find. Titanic. For so many years, there were many expeditions, and Robert Ballard back in 1985 found the ship. He found the Bismarck. More and more of these, more and more of the lost history is being found. But Amelia Earhart has so much mystery surrounding it, and it consumes so much mystery. Mike has written a book, Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last is his book. His website is earharttruth.com, or you can go to earharttruth.wordpress.com. He's got an amazing blog out there. Without any further delay, let's get Mike on the line. Mike, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Thank you, Pat. Good to be with you. Deepest condolences on your recent loss, Pat. I can't even begin to imagine what it must have been like for you. I don't have children myself. All I can do is pray for her and pray for all of you to get past this tragic event.
Well, I want to thank you, Mike, and again, thanks for being patient with us. So wanted to get you on the show. I know we had to move things around a few times, and I want to thank you for your flexibility and your kind words. And she loved what we did and loved doing this, so hey, we're going to go ahead and march on. Anyway, tonight, for the next couple hours, we're going to talk about Amelia Earhart. Why don't you give us a little bit of? I would like you to educate us all a little bit about Amelia and maybe step back a little bit and go a little into the details. But how did you get involved with writing your book, and how did this all come your way and your pursuit of trying to get the truth, let people know what's going on?
Well, Pat, actually, this is the second book that I've written on the Earhart matter. The first one was written in 2002. It was that title was With Our Own Eyes, okay. Eyewitnesses to the Final Days of Amelia Earhart. The first book was not nearly as good as this second book that was published in 2012. This second book is really my life's work. I don't think I'm going to ever do anything that's going to equal this book. There's so much, Pat. There's so much to talk about with the Earhart disappearance. We do have time tonight. I mean, thank you for giving me the time to talk to your listeners and to help them to understand how they've been lied to and misled their whole lives, basically, unless they happen to be students of this and they understand and they do know the facts that are. It's not really a secret. It's just suppressed greatly. The truth about what happened to her is greatly suppressed. I got started with this, Pat, in 1988. I was working for the Navy as a writer in a Navy agency as a civilian. This is very ironic that it was the Navy that I was working for that told me to do this story about the Earhart disappearance, because the Navy was so intimately involved with the initial searches and with the initial cover-up of the Earhart matter. But the people, of course, that I was working for in Arlington, Virginia in 1988 and putting out information to the Navy and Marine Corps stations, all the ships and stations around the world, I was writing for their newspapers, they had no inside knowledge of the Earhart thing at all. Almost no one does anymore, especially back then. I mean, I was just a regular guy working for the Navy doing a story, and then I did a story. I looked at the Earhart thing from the perspective of several writers, several books, and I read the books, and one of the books, well, more than one, jumped out at me. I was instantly just captivated by the whole thing. But one of the writers was Thomas E. Devine, and his book was Eyewitness, the Amelia Earhart Incident. It was published in 1987, just a year before I was assigned this story. Now, in this book, I don't want to jump too far ahead. There's so many different ways to look into, to attack the subject for your listeners, but it's best to try to keep it simple. I mean, because there's just so many threads. in my book alone, there's just hundreds of different threads and hundreds of witnesses and pieces of evidence. We organize it so that it's logical and it's laid out historically as much as possible, and so that you can see the logical progression of what happened with the Earhart thing. Now, I will get back to Thomas Devine, but this is how I got started. I contacted Devine, who had written this book, and in his book, he recounted his experiences on Saipan. In 1944, as a GI, he was a member of the Army's 244th Postal Unit. He came onto Saipan, which was the key battle in the Pacific up to that time. It was the key victory in the Pacific that launched us to that would have launched us to Japan. We set up B-29s on Saipan after that victory, and we attacked the mainland. That was the biggest victory in the Pacific War, was Saipan. And Thomas Devine was not a combatant, actually. He was an Army postal sergeant, second in command of this unit. When he got to the island, he was made aware that the Earhart plane had been discovered on Saipan. He saw the plane, and he actually climbed onto the wing and saw the markings of the plane, and then later saw the plane destroyed. Now, we can get back to that later. I think it's best to do that. But you asked me how I got involved. Well, I read several books. I wrote a story. I contacted Devine. I was so fascinated by it. And Devine took me under his wing because then, and even more so now, very, very few people are interested in the Earhart disappearance. You might think otherwise, but believe me, I've been on this story for 26 years, Pat. I've sent out I send thousands and thousands of emails out weekly to people, trying to get the word out, trying to get people interested. I know firsthand how little people actually care about this. There are many reasons why so few people care about the truth in the Earhart case. One of the major reasons is, well, several of the major reasons. Lack of education is one. We don't teach history properly in the schools anymore. Kids are growing up, they don't even know who she was. Another reason is that there's too many other things going on in this world right now that are threatening our very existence. And the truth of what happened to Amelia Earhart is not one of them. It's way down the list of priorities that people have. There's another, at the network level and the major newspaper level, there is still an active disinformation campaign, an active cover-up not to release the truth about her death on Saipan. This is a fact that I know very well. Only people like you and a few other people in the radio business, independent-type operators that aren't bought and sold in the marketplace and don't belong to a network, a major network, or even a minor network, will touch this story. But you have no idea how many people will not even entertain this story. They won't even consider it. I've been ignored by thousands when I try to get the word out about this story. You're the first radio guy that's had me on for over a month. And the last time I was on a radio program was with another relative of the Inception radio program, Epic Voyagers.
Right, exactly. Well, the thing is, Mike, when we talk about aviation, and you're right, today's kids, life in general is keeping, people are on the go. The kids of today, of course, it's all about Facebook and Twitter and Google and all this other stuff. They're so hung up in today's technology, which I think is good and is bad in some cases. But, as far as Earhart goes, I mean, she is the pioneer in aviation. Women look up to her. It seems like every now and then we hear about it, but then the story just dies and it gets put to sleep. Titanic, of course, there was, thousands of people that perished on Titanic, but look at the efforts that were put into finding Titanic and some of these other things. And I just wish that, and you can talk to that the same kind of efforts would be put into what you are doing, why people just won't come out and talk about it and validate some of these things and just let the general public know what really happened.
Well, Pat, here's the thing. The Titanic is not, this is not the same kind of a story as the Titanic. Once you learn about what is actually involved with this. The Titanic was an historical event that has been. There's really very little mystery and very little politics involved with it. The Titanic was finally found, and it's and there's no active, there's not an active conspiracy to keep it up. And I'm not saying that I shouldn't have used that word, because that is the word that the skeptics will use all the time to denigrate the truth about what happened to Amelia Earhart. Now, let's get to the, we do have time, but we need to start on what happened, logically, and time-wise, linear-wise, what really happened. So, we talk about Amelia Earhart. We're talking about arguably, certainly one of the most famous women of the 20th century. And during the 1930s, she was probably the most famous woman in the world, arguably with Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a friend of hers. In 1937, Amelia Earhart was attempting to crown her incredible aviation career with a flight around the world, that would circumnavigate the globe at 27,000 miles around the world, as close to the equator as she could possibly get that thing scheduled. She would have beaten Wiley Post's previous record by 12,000 miles if she would have completed that flight. Now, between 1930 and 1935, she held 8 women's speed and distance records, world records. She flew from Hawaii to Oakland. She flew from Mexico City to Newark, New Jersey. She flew from her most famous flight was her flight from Newfoundland, Harbor Grace, Newfoundland to Londonderry Island. She became the second woman, or the first woman in history, and the second person to fly solo across the Atlantic. Charles Lindbergh, in 1928, I believe, was the first. This made Amelia a mega superstar in 1932. She got honors. She got the French Honor of Legion of Honor award. She got special awards back in this country. She was a toast of 2 continents. Amelia Earhart was it, but she was not by far the only female aviator. There weren't a lot of them. There may have been a dozen, but she was definitely the best known. So, in 1937, February, she announced that she would complete her career with a flight circumnavigating the globe around the world closest to the equator. It was supposed to take about 33 days or so. When she began the first takeoff was March 2nd, I believe, 1937, from Luke Field in Hawaii. She ground looped. She crashed on takeoff and really messed the plane up. The plane had to be sent back to Burbank. The Electra 10E that she was her plane. State-of-the-art for that day, twin-engine, 600-horsepower Wasp engines, and the best radio equipment available, but it wasn't good enough, as we'll see down the road. What kind of breaks are we looking at, Pat, on this?
We've got about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll take a few minutes, and then we got another 20 minutes news, and then another hour.
Okay, great. I'm looking at I'm seeing it's almost 8:30, so I was wondering.
No, you're good to go.
Okay. So after her first disaster on her takeoff, and they could have been killed. The navigator that she had selected, Harry Manning, who was very well known, he was a master mariner. He was also a sea ship mariner, very well known in that way. Harry Manning ran away from her as fast as he could after that takeoff at Luke Field, and they almost got killed. So, and he made no bones about it. He said that she blew it. They had too much fuel on the takeoff. They were too heavy, and she just didn't manage the takeoff properly. There's speculation about this, that some say that she might have done it on purpose so that they could reverse directions on their world flight. That's all just academic. A couple months later, she took off from Burbank with a repaired airplane, and they went in the other direction from west to east. They wound up 30 days later at Lae, New Guinea. They didn't have the first 30 days. There were a few small mishaps, but nothing major. Right. And they were at Lae, New Guinea, and they were looking at the toughest part of the flight. 2,556 miles from Lae, New Guinea to Howland Island, which was in the middle of the Pacific. The flight had never been done. There was a special airstrip that had been cleared on Howland by the United States government so that she could land there and take off, and from Howland Island she would go. She would fly about 1,900 miles to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to Oakland to complete the flight. But this Howland flight, this is where she was lost. Her last message was given at her radio communications throughout the flight were very bizarre, Pat. She was never on the air for more than 8 to 10 seconds at the most, never long enough for the Itasca, which was the Coast Guard cutter that was anchored off of Howland, to talk her in, to help her, to give her all the technical help that they could. She was never on the air long enough for them to help her. There were also considerable communication gaps. They didn't. She had left her 500 kilohertz trailing antenna in Hawaii, which meant she couldn't broadcast strongly on that frequency, which was the main frequency that Itasca would use to find her, to give for their direction finders to get a beat on her. And it was just, the whole communications thing was just a disaster. And this is another piece of evidence that we have that leads people to believe that she didn't want to find Howland Island. One of the radio men on the Itasca, Bill Galton, a third-class radio man, told Paul Rafford Jr., who's 95 years old, who's still alive and well, an Earhart researcher, told Paul Rafford that Amelia Earhart did not want to find Howland Island, did not want to land here. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but after she gave, her last message was at 8:44 a.m. Howland local time, and she's told them that she was running, she was on line of position 157, 337. We're running north and south, wait listening on 3105. We'll broadcast again on the half hour, something like that. I'm just paraphrasing. That was the last time she was officially heard from, okay? Of course, the Coast Guard immediately commenced a search. The Itasca went northwest because that's where the clouds were, and they figured they would have seen her. Her last message was heard at strength 505 by Chief Radio Man Leo Bellards. Leo Bellards, he reported that to Elgin Long, another researcher. And he said he expected to see her plane coming over. He ran up on the deck and expected to see her plane coming over the Itasca, but it was not to be. The Itasca looked for her northwest. Soon after that, a few days later, the USS Colorado, the battleship, came down into the area. And then a few days after that, the Lexington carrier, the battle group with the Lexington, had 3 or 4 different ships with it, with 63 aircraft. All in all, the Navy searched 262,000 square miles around Howland Island, in a radius, just a huge area. They found nothing, not even a trace, not an oil slick, nothing. This search, believe it or not, was claimed to have cost at the time $4 million.
Wow.
I find that hard to believe, Pat. Even in 1937 dollars, I think it. I mean, if that search was conducted today, it would cost more like $4 billion than $4 million. And I don't believe that the dollar has gone that exponentially bad since 1937. Not maybe 10 times or 20 times worse, but this search was a costly search. There's no question about it. But the findings were, they all said, well, she came down, she had to have come down in the water and sunk, and that was it. And then, and officially, with one exception, this is the last official word on Amelia Earhart from our government. 1937 report, with one exception, the 1960 Office of Naval Investigation report, which we'll get to in a little while. But it's not the time now, I don't think, to get into that.
Okay.
Because the ONI report has never been covered in the media, has never been mentioned, to my knowledge, by any media organization since it was declassified in 1967. Okay? Now, let's start. Let's give your listeners a break. Instead of having me prattle on about this and that, let's give them the big picture, what we talk about, what the book outlines, what the witnesses show, what the documents show, what everything shows from beginning to end, what happened to Amelia Earhart. Okay? Where did she land and what happened? Then we'll go back and we'll talk about the witnesses that we have that establish all these things and how this is not a theory. What happened to Amelia Earhart is not a theory, it's a fact. And this idea that it's a mystery, you began your show, I don't hold it against you, you began your show by saying this is an event cloaked in mystery. This is because the establishment from 1937 onward has wanted you to think it's a mystery. They have promoted that idea to the point where it's become a piece of the cultural furniture. It's not a mystery what happened to her at all. The modern search can be chronicled back to 1950, 1960 with Paul Briand's book, Daughter of the Sky. And he introduces Josephine Blanco Akiyama, who saw Amelia Earhart on Saipan in 1937, landing at Tanapag, after she had landed at Tanapag Harbor in a seaplane. Here's what happened to Amelia Earhart, Pat, okay?
Go ahead, let's hear it.
They landed, her and Fred Noonan. Fred Noonan was her navigator. She and Fred Noonan landed at Mille Atoll, in the lagoon at Mille Atoll, 800 miles northwest of Howland Island. They landed wheels up right off of Berry Island. From Berry, they were seen. We have witnesses that will attest to this, and they're all everything that we're talking about here, which is, of course, this is all just off the top of my head and sketchy and everything. There's witnesses. None of this is conjecture. Nothing in my book is conjecture. It's all meticulously footnoted and researched. This book is not about me. This is about the truth. This is about facts that have been established. She landed at Mille Atoll. She was picked up at Mille Atoll by the Japanese, as was her airplane picked up at Mille Atoll and put on the back of the Koshu. It was winched aboard the Koshu. She and Fred Noonan were taken aboard the Koshu to Jalowit, which was the Marshall's headquarters of the Japanese. In those days, the Marshall Islands were off limits to all Westerners. The Marshall Islands were solely the property of the Japanese, granted to them by the League of Nations mandate in 1920. From Jalowit, the Japanese took her to Roy Namor, which was an island with an airstrip and also a seaplane base. From Roy Namor in the Marshalls, she was flown to Saipan. From Saipan, which was the Japanese headquarters in the Northern Marianas, which was like their super military headquarters in the Marianas. Well, other people will argue that they weren't built up very much in 1937. They weren't built up that much in 37 on Saipan, but they still had a significant military presence there, and that's where she was taken for interrogation, because she was taken as a spy. She was not supposed to be there. She didn't ask for permission to be there on Mille, where she landed, and the Japanese in 1937 were in no mood to be conciliatory with this government. Contrary to what many critics and skeptics of this will have you believe, they took her to Saipan, and they had no love for her or Noonan.
Can I ask you a quick question, Mike? When she landed there, did she land on purpose? Did she run out of fuel? Did the airplane have a problem? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Pat, this is the mystery. This is the true mystery in the Earhart disappearance. Why and how she got to Mille Atoll.
Okay.
Did she land there because she couldn't find Howland and turned north and then turned east or turned west to find the Gilberts, as she told some of her friends she would do if she had a problem with this? Or did she fly to Mille inadvertently after she had overflown Truk, for example, doing possibly some weight reconnaissance at the request of FDR? This is also possible. We do have significant anecdotal evidence that she was asked to do some of this sort of white reconnaissance by FDR. It's not proof by any means. Not proof by any means. And so we are still left with that speculation. Did she go there on purpose, or did she go there because she was trying to find Jalowit's 50,000-watt radio transmitter where she knew she could find the landfall and she could land safely? Despite the fact that she knew the Japanese weren't friendly, she knew she could land. She had to find land. So, I don't want to spend even though we do have this time, I don't want to spend too much time on that. But, for example, Margot DeCary, her personal secretary, told the San Fernando Valley News in November 1966 that Amelia was working for the government. She told them that she and George Putnam always had to leave the room, I'm quoting, when meetings were held. To me, it looked like she was supposed to get lost in the theory the Japanese would allow a peace mission to search for her. The United States could see if the Japanese were fortifying the Marshall Islands in violation of mutual agreements. We have a second-hand report from Roland Reineck, another well-known Earhart researcher, that Bernard Baruch and Major General Oscar Westover had 2 meetings with Amelia in between flights, in between her Luke crash and her Burbank, her Oakland takeoff in June of 1937 at March Field in Riverside, California. That they had 2 secret meetings at least with her. No one else was allowed to be there, and this information came through, I believe, Margot DeCary also to Joe Gervais, another well-known Earhart researcher. Roland Reineck wrote that the Roosevelt administration needed something, and Baruch and Westover were sent to California as ambassadors to see if Amelia Earhart could help achieve the national objectives the administration had established. Reineck wrote, he believed 2 plans were eventually agreed upon that could achieve the intelligence objectives sought, and neither plan would violate her pacifist philosophies or involve any overt spying, but would require that she change the direction of the flight. Now, another guy named Art Kennedy claimed that Amelia actually told him, can you imagine me as a spy?
Right.
We have all these little bits and pieces, that go into it, and so... yeah, it's possible that she did not want to reach Allen Island, that she was up to something. But here's the thing, Pat, and here's the real thing. Are you still there?
Yep, we're still here.
Okay, because I thought we were going to have a break in 10 minutes.
No, we just kept rolling.
Okay. Well, you let me know.
we're keep going, man. Keep going.
Okay. Well, what was I going to say? Bits and pieces about that lead us to believe that she was up to something besides just a straightforward attempt to reach Allen Island. There's so many pieces of evidence, yes, that do lead us to believe that. However, if the plan was for her to land at Mille Atoll to give the United States Navy a chance to come in and look at the Marshall Islands and to see what was going on, this was the stupidest plan. This was the dumbest intelligence operation ever undertaken. It just made no sense from the start to assume that the Japanese would be friendly to us and to her after we were already beginning a very bad history with them, and to assume these things just made no sense whatsoever at the time. And when we asked the Japanese if we can come in the Marshall Islands and look for her, they didn't just say no, Pat. They said hell no.
Right. I have another question for you that somebody actually sent in, Mike. There was, and this is, again, I don't know if this is conspiracy or what have you, rumors. My understanding that the Coast Guard of the time was involved with the search, correct?
Yes. The Itasca. The Coast Guard got her Itasca.
Was there some, I had heard rumors, read some different things that stated that ship, while it was a rescue ship, also potentially could have been carrying armament, war-type materials. Any thoughts on that?
I've never even heard that, really, in all my...
Kind of flying, no. Flying the Coast Guard flag under camouflage, if you will. I actually had a couple listeners send me that question.
Well, if they could tell you the source of where they heard this, maybe we could look it up and see see what we can find. I've never heard such a thing. The Coast Guard cutter Itasca was just that. It was a Coast Guard cutter, and it was there to help talk her into Howland Island. She was trying to achieve something officially that had never been done. That flight had never been made in 1937. It was an extremely difficult flight. Howland Island was a speck in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and they didn't have the most advanced navigation techniques in those days, and it was a tough thing to do. And so, no, I don't know anything.
I'll dig into that a little bit, because I've actually heard that a couple of times. I've had that question posed and brought up a couple of times that the Itasca might have been under camouflage for something else. Just a little bit of the fringy stuff we throw out there.
Okay. Well, if you could just get some more information on where they heard that, because I've read all the books, and some of the books are really pretty strange, and they get some pretty strange ideas, such as there were another pair of white pilots in that area at the time, British pilots that were not Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan, and this is where all the confusion. I've heard some strange ideas, but I have not heard this one. Okay, so I'm trying to think now what we should do. First of all, I think we should name let your listeners know the name of the book. The thing about this is, Pat, it's so hard to get the word out about this book, because only people like you will stand up and put it just a little bit. As I said earlier, the establishment still does not want this information out about Saipan and Amelia Earhart. Let's go to 1960, okay?
Sure.
There was nothing really heard during the war years except a few. There were a few newspaper reports that came out of Saipan about things about her connected to her and in the Marshalls being found. But these reports never had follow-ups, and they were quickly squelched. In 1960, that's when the modern search for Amelia Earhart actually began, when Paul Breon Jr. wrote his book, Daughter of the Sky. A very little known, it was just a garden variety biography of Amelia Earhart until the last chapter. In the last chapter of that book, Paul Breon introduced Josephine Blanco Akiyama's account as an 11-year-old girl on Saipan and seeing Amelia Earhart. This account at the end of Breon's book in 1960 is what really started things going. I'll just read you just a quick. He didn't even quote her. Paul Breon's account came from Dr. Casimir Sheft, who was a dentist on Saipan and had Josephine Blanco as his assistant in the late 40s. And she told him her story that in 1937 she was riding her bicycle toward Tanapag Harbor, which was actually off-limits to most people on Saipan. That was a Japanese seaplane base there, and they had other military things going on, and so you had to have a special pass to go there to get in. She had a special pass because her brother was working there. She was bringing her brother's lunch, and I'm just rushing this, but she says, on the way to meet her brother-in-law, Josephine heard an airplane flying overhead. She looked up and saw a silver two-engine plane. The plane seemed to be in trouble, for it came down low, headed out into the harbor, and belly landed on the water. Now, this idea of the plane belly landing is, that does play right into a primitive understanding of a seaplane and what a seaplane would do. Seaplanes were relatively new to Saipan at the time, and she was only 11 years old. I'm reading now again from Briand. He says it was not until she met her brother-in-law that Josephine discovered who it was that crash landed in the harbor. The American Woman, everyone was saying, greatly excited, come see the American Woman. Josephine and her brother-in-law joined the knot of people who gathered to watch. She saw the American Woman standing next to a tall man wearing a short-sleeved sports shirt and was surprised because the woman was not dressed as a woman usually dressed. Instead of a dress, the American Woman wore a man's shirt and trousers, and instead of long hair, she wore her hair cut short like a man. The faces of the man and woman were white and drawn as if they were sick. Now, Briand added that Josephine had identified a photo of Earhart and Noonan as absolutely being that of the same man and woman she saw in Saipan in 1937. This idea of witnesses identifying photos of her out of a lineup of 6, 7, 10 photos typifies researchers' methods in their investigations to make sure that these people knew what they were talking about, and witnesses unerringly would always pick out her photo. Now, there was a reporter from the San Mateo Times that heard about this report from Paul Briand's book, and he went and he interviewed Josephine Blanco Wakayama, and he believed her, and he wrote stories about her in the San Mateo Times. And then Fred Gerner, okay, the KCBS newsman from San Francisco, saw the reports in the paper, and he went and interviewed Josephine, and he believed her. And then Fred Gerner went to Saipan in May or June of 1960, the first of 4 trips that he made to Saipan, interviewing witnesses and getting other evidence that established that Amelia Earhart was on Saipan in 1937. One of his witnesses, one of Gerner's witnesses, was a dentist named Manuel Aldon. He was a native Saipanese. He understood Japanese, and he worked with Japanese officers on Saipan in 1937 because dentists were kind of hard to come by in those days, especially on Saipan, and these officers had a monopoly on Dr. Aldon's services. And Aldon told Gerner, the name of the lady I hear used. This is the name the Japanese officer said, Earharto. Aldon said he heard much about Earhart from his patients, and in 1937, they, as I said, were restricted to Japanese officers. The officers made jokes about the United States using women as spies. They said that American men did not have the courage to come and spy themselves. This idea of her as a spy is a constant theme on the Japanese side or in the Saipanese side and what they heard from the Japanese on Saipan. Now, Gerner and Linwood Day, the reporter from the San Mateo Times, were doing some serious work on Saipan in June and July of 1960. Now, on July 1st, Pat, 1960, the San Mateo Times headline, 100-point headline, stated, Amelia Earhart mystery is solved. And then the story underneath said, famed aviatrix died on Saipan. This was July 1st, 1960. This was a result of Fred Gerner's first trip to Saipan. That headline, Pat, in 1960 was true then, and it's just as true today. Okay, you know, with details soon to come. Gerner wrote. Gerner visited 3 more times to Saipan, wrote a book in 1966 that most of your listeners probably haven't heard of, unless they're over 75 or 80 years old. The name of the book was A Search for Amelia Earhart, and it sold over 400,000 copies. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for I think 6 months. Maybe I'm wrong. It could have been 6 weeks, 6 something. But it sold a lot of books, and a lot of people in this country knew about what Gerner had found on Saipan, and they started rattling their congressmen's cages and demanding answers in the mid-1960s. This was when we were closest, you know, to knocking down the doors of secrecy that still surround this case. Nothing happened. Nobody could get through the stonewalling about the Earhart thing. That's a pretty familiar theme nowadays, stonewalling, right. You know, Benghazi, etc.
Sure.
Yeah, so, you know, this is nothing new. This is nothing new about the government lying to its citizens. In 1966, shortly after Gerner's book came out, and people, you know, were galvanized. This country, the most ever that it's ever been about the Earhart thing. Time magazine came out and weighed in on all this and gave its verdict. and they trashed Gerner's book. They said it barely hung together, that he could not speak for U.S. and Japanese governments, and that nobody should believe a word he wrote, and that all of this stuff about Saipan was nonsense. This is what Time magazine said. Time magazine in those days was the voice of the establishment media, and there were very few other voices in those days. And that was it. That was it from then on in the media. We don't talk about Earhart and Saipan. We talk about going in the drink off of Howland Island, and then several decades later, at the end of the 1980s, we hear that, oh no, she probably didn't go in the water. She probably landed at Nicomararo, which is what your listeners now are subjected to on a bi-yearly basis at the least, with the TIGAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery. They've been back to Nicomararo 10 times. They're going on their 11th time going back to this island where they claim that she landed. This is all that the people in this country ever hear about the Earhart matter. It's complete disinformation, and it's completely false. There's absolutely no way in the world she ever landed there, and we can basically prove it.
Well, with TIGAR, you know, I mentioned to you, Mike, in an email, and I'll just be honest about it. We actually requested a couple interviews out of them and got turned down, especially having Carol and Dow on the show, and if their response back to us was, well, if you know you're a science fiction show, we don't want to come on programs like yours. They told me right out.
Exactly right. Why would they need to come on your show when they have Discovery News doing documentaries about their trips to Nicomararo, and then how they should be finding the plane every time they go over there? They don't need to go. They don't need to go on your show. They don't. They don't want to go on your show. It doesn't help them whatsoever. I've been back and forth with the main writer. Actually, just back because she never replies to me. There's a writer for Discovery News who has been doing their propaganda for several years. I even sent her a copy of my book, and she didn't even have the decency to reply.
Wow. I know that I know one thing, and it's kind of out there. It's not anything made up, but they've been tied and linked to many donation type programs also for pulling in large sums of money. I understand, was it the last trip, Mike? Maybe, I don't know if you know all the details, but actually they involved Robert Ballard, the Titanic guy, on their, I believe it was their last expedition, and he bailed off 2 or 3 days after being into it with the infamous photograph of the Electra's landing gear taken from a Japanese satellite.
Oh, this is
in the lagoon,
nonsense. They find any sort of garbage or assorted junk over there, and they try to tie it to her, to Amelia, in some way. It never stands up. It never holds up. And but whatever they say, the monkeys in the mainstream media, who are still invested in the TIGAR narrative, in the establishment false narrative about what happened to her, they just echo everything he says. It's just really. It's just the way the story is. It's the way it plays, and it's the way it's been handled. It's the way the establishment views it, and it's all. It's almost 9 o'clock. I don't want to step on the commercial.
Yeah, we're fine. We're going to go ahead. Our guest tonight is Mike Campbell. Mike, let's give out your websites real quick. We've got NBC News coming up in about a minute and a half, but your websites and the book and where people can get your book.
Yeah, please. The book is Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last. You can get it on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and Google Amelia Earhart, and you'll find the book very easily. The Truth at Last, Mike Campbell is my name. My website is www.earharttruth.com. This is not, Pat, just a book. This is a cause. This is a cause for what is absolutely right. This poor woman, Amelia Earhart, has been so disrespected, and she has yet to be actually put to rest properly from the tragedy that happened to her in 1937. She died a wretched, miserable, lonely death on Saipan at the hands of the Japanese. This is a fact. And this is what our government and our establishment absolutely hates. They do not want our public to know about it. Therefore, you'll never hear about it except on programs like this and from people like me. It's not. Well, I think I better wait till after the news, and then we'll get to that.
We're going to talk more about it and get more of your insight and more of the facts on how she died and her last days, and want to hear more about it.